Wesley Grant had conquered boardrooms, launched tech empires, and dropped seven figures on beach villas without blinking but standing on an ice rink for the first time in 35 years? That had him gripping the wall like it might save his life. "I'm going to die," he muttered under his breath, shoes awkwardly scraping the ice as he tried to stay upright. "You're not going to die," came a voice from behind, light, amused, and definitely not panicked. "But you might break something if you keep leaning like that." He turned his head too fast, which nearly threw off his balance. A woman skated toward him with the kind of grace he'd only seen in Olympic reruns. She stopped beside him without effort, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes bright and steady. "I'm Willow Ellis, instructor. And you're clearly not from around here," she said, offering her gloved hand. He hesitated for a second before shaking it. "Wesley, and I am very much regretting this idea." She grinned. "Let me guess. Someone dared you. My assistant signed me up. Said I needed to experience winter like a normal person. I told her normal people don't willingly slide around on frozen water with knives on their feet." Willow laughed. "Well, lucky for you, I'm very good at stopping people from falling on their faces." He looked down at his feet like they were ticking bombs. "That makes one of us." She extended a hand again. "Come on. We'll start with the basics. I won't let you fall." He stared at her, uncertain. She was beautiful in a way he hadn't expected, complicated. There was something about her voice that was warm but sharp, like she didn't do fake politeness. Maybe that's what made him take her hand. They moved slowly, inch by inch, with Willow guiding one of his arms while using the other to keep him balanced. Every time he wobbled, she steadied him. Every time he cursed under his breath, she laughed like she didn't mind. "I feel like a baby, dear," he grunted. "You're not the worst I've seen," she said. "That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be." He shot her a look. She smiled back, and something in his chest shifted. For the next hour, he let her guide him, correcting his stance, adjusting his feet, teaching him how to glide. And somehow they kept talking. About small things at first: weather, the rink, why he was even in this tiny Colorado town in the first place. "A week off," he said while trying not to trip. "My COO practically forced me to take it. Said I was turning into a machine." Willow raised an eyebrow. "So you picked snow?" "I thought I'd ski. I didn't realize the resort would be booked solid and that I'd end up here. And yet here you are. On the ice." He glanced over at her. Not the worst detour. Her cheeks flushed deeper, and he wondered if it was just the cold. By the time they got off the ice, Wesley's legs were aching and his pride was bruised. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. As they unlaced their skates, he found himself glancing at her more than once. "So, do I get a ribbon or something for not dying?" he asked. Willow stood, pulling her hat down over her ears. "You get another lesson tomorrow. Same time." He blinked. "You assume I'm coming back?" She shrugged. "You're not a quitter." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You don't know anything about me. I know you didn't give up when you looked like a penguin trying to walk through quicksand." He laughed. "Fair." Willow turned, walking toward the staff room. But halfway there, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. "See you tomorrow, Wesley." And just like that, she was gone. Wesley stayed in his seat for a long moment, watching the door she disappeared through. There was something about her, something sharp and soft all at once. He hadn't expected to feel anything when he got on the ice today except cold and frustrated. But instead he felt curious. And maybe a little off balance, but not in the way the rink had made him. The next day he came back. He didn't tell himself why. He didn't admit that he'd barely slept the night before, thinking about her laugh, the way she'd looked at him without caring who he was or what he was worth. He just showed up. Willow was already on the ice, her hair pulled back, her body gliding across the rink like it was second nature. He stood there for a second, watching her. She didn't notice him at first. But when she did, she smiled. Not a polite one. A real one. "You came back," she said as he stepped onto the ice, wobbling. "I'm a glutton for punishment. Or maybe you just like the instructor." He looked at her, caught off guard. But she didn't say it like it was a flirt. She said it like it was a challenge. "Maybe I do," he said quietly. Her eyes flickered for a moment. But then she turned, motioning him forward. "Let's see if you actually learned anything." They practiced again. And again the next day. And the next, Wesley found himself rearranging his schedule, canceling a dinner meeting, skipping a conference call. He told himself it was the exercise, the fresh air, the chance to do something new, but he knew it was her. He started noticing the details: how she always wore mismatched socks under her skates, how she had a tiny scar near her temple, how she bit the inside of her cheek when she was thinking. And she asked him questions. Real ones. Not the kind people asked when they were trying to impress him. She didn't care about his company or his bank account. She cared about what made him laugh, what made him angry, why he didn't take more time off. "You're not what I expected," she said one afternoon as they sat on the bench post-lesson. "And what did you expect? Some rich guy with too much ego and not enough patience." He laughed. "You're not wrong. I don't think you're just that, though." He looked at her. "And what do you think I am?" Willow didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, her eyes soft but serious. Still figuring that out. And somehow that mattered more than any compliment he'd ever gotten. Wesley didn't know what was happening, not exactly. But every time he stepped onto that ice, it wasn't about skating anymore. It was about her. And he had a feeling he was already falling. By the fifth lesson, Wesley no longer needed to hold Willow's hand to stay upright, but he still found excuses to do it anyway. She noticed, of course. Willow noticed everything. The way he adjusted his gloves when he was thinking. How he scanned the rink before stepping on, like he was preparing for battle. She even noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders when his phone buzzed in his coat pocket and he ignored it. "Someone's important," she said, skating backward as he followed, less shaky than before. "I was," he replied, eyes locked on hers. "Now I'm trying to figure out what it means not to be." She slowed until they were gliding side by side. "You say that like it's supposed to be frightening. It is. Most people fight to matter. I spent years becoming indispensable. Now I'm trying to disappear before I forget what that feels like." Willow didn't say anything for a moment. Then she looked ahead and said, "You ever think maybe you're not meant to disappear? Maybe you just need someone to see you differently?" He didn't answer right away. The words settled somewhere deeper than he expected. That night, he didn't drive straight back to his rental cabin. Instead, he found himself walking through the small town center, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, breath curling in the air. He passed a bakery with frosted windows, a bookstore with a crooked "Open Late" sign, and finally an old theater with peeling gold trim around the marquee. He paused, staring at the display of upcoming shows. Then he pulled out his phone and tapped out a message to his assistant: "Find out who owns the Majestic Theater in Silver Pine." Quietly. The next afternoon, Willow didn't meet him at the rink. Instead, a teen with a nose ring and an oversized hoodie handed him a note. "Willow's covering for someone at the lodge," the girl said, then skated off before he could ask more. He unfolded the paper. "Didn't think you'd last this long? Go easy on yourself today. No pirouettes unless you want to end up in the ER." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Wesley stared at the note longer than he meant to. He should have left it at that: a missed lesson, a quiet afternoon, but instead he asked around. It took 3 different people and a $20 tip at the coffee cart before someone mentioned the lodge at the edge of town. He found her on the back deck, shoveling snow with thick gloves and a red scarf wrapped around her neck. She didn't see him at first. "You know, there are less exhausting ways to spend a day off," he called out. Willow straightened, startled. "How did you?" I asked. She leaned on the shovel. "You track me down? I'm persistent. Or nosy." He stepped closer, his boots crunching over the salted path. "You didn't say you worked a second job. You didn't ask." She brushed snow off her sleeve. "Besides, it's not permanent. Just filling in for a friend whose mom's recovering from surgery." He watched her for a moment. "You always step in when someone needs something?" She hesitated. "Not always. But I know what it's like when no one does." He didn't press. Didn't have to. The look in her eyes said more than she meant to. "Come on," she said, tossing him a shovel from the nearby rack. "You want to hang around, you're going to help." He caught it one-handed. "I'm not exactly dressed for manual labor. Neither am I. But here we are." They worked in tandem, clearing the deck and salting the stairs. Every few minutes she'd glance at him like she couldn't quite believe he was still there. When they finished, she pulled off one glove and rubbed her hand over her forehead. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said, brushing snow from his sleeve. "But I wanted to." She looked at him for a long second, then said, "You want coffee? The staff room has terrible instant, but it's hot." He nodded once. "Lead the way." Inside, they sat on mismatched chairs, cradling chipped mugs. The heater clanked in the corner, barely keeping up with the cold. Willow blew on her drink. "You're not what I expected either." "Oh?" he asked, cocking a brow. "Most guys who come through here treat it like a novelty. A break from their lives. You don't seem like you're on vacation." "I'm not." "Then what are you doing?" He stared down into his cup before answering. "Looking for a reason not to go back." She was quiet for a beat. "And have you found one?" He looked at her, really looked at her. "Maybe." Something passed between them. Not quite said, but understood. Later, when he walked her home, the silence wasn't awkward. It was full. Every step through the snow-packed sidewalks felt heavy with something unspoken. She stopped in front of a narrow porch with wind chimes tangled in the rafters. "This is me." He nodded. "Thanks for the coffee. Thanks for the help." They stood there, neither moving. Finally, she said, "I'll see you tomorrow. Try and stop me." She turned to go, then paused. "Wesley." "Yeah?" "You don't have to disappear to be seen." She didn't wait for a response. Just climbed the steps and slipped inside. He stood there for a long time after the door closed. That night, he called his assistant. "Push the board meeting," he said. "Tell them I'll be back next week." There was a pause. "Sir, you don't have any meetings next week. Then clear the week after that." "I'm extending my stay." He hung up before she could ask why. He already knew the answer. And it had nothing to do with skiing. The town had never seen anything like it. One morning, without warning, the front of the majestic theater was covered in scaffolding. Painters, electricians, and contractors buzzed around under the early sun like a hive of bees, hauling in supplies and stripping away decades of neglect. In a town where nothing changed and people still left their doors unlocked, the sudden transformation sent a ripple through every diner booth and hardware aisle. Willow stood across the street with a bag of groceries tucked under her arm, staring at the scene with narrowed eyes. When Wesley walked up beside her, hands in his coat pockets, she didn't look at him. "You wouldn't happen to know what's going on over there, would you?" He followed her gaze to the gilded facade being restored inch by inch. "I might. You bought the Majestic, didn't you?" "I did." She turned to him, incredulous. "Why?" Wesley didn't blink. "Because it mattered to you." Willow blinked once, the wind catching strands of her hair. "I never said that. You didn't have to. I saw the way you looked at the marquee. The way your voice changed when you mentioned watching old movies there as a kid." Her mouth parted, but no words came out. He stepped closer. "The town was letting it rot. I didn't want that to be the end of something that meant something to you." She shook her head slowly. "You barely know me, Wesley." "I know enough to want to." Willow stepped back, pressing her hand to her forehead. "You can't just buy sentimental things and expect them to mean more. I didn't do it to impress you." "Then why?" "Because when I see something broken that deserves better, I fix it. And maybe I wanted something here to last longer than a week." The silence that followed wasn't cold. But it wasn't warm either. It hovered between them, uncertain. Willow didn't say anything else. She turned, groceries still clutched tight, and walked away without looking back. Wesley didn't follow. Instead, he stayed by the theater, watching the workers hoist new lights into place and wondering if, for once, he'd miscalculated. The next 2 days were quiet. Willow didn't show up at the rink, and no one seemed to know where she was. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Wesley tried not to overthink it, but the silence gnawed at him. He'd crossed a line, he knew that. He just didn't know which one. On the third morning, he drove to the edge of town and parked beneath a row of bare aspens lining a quiet trail. He didn't know why he chose to walk that path, only that he needed air, and it was the only place he hadn't seen yet. Halfway through the winding trail, he heard it music. Soft, wavering notes drifting through the trees like a memory. He followed the sound until he found her. Willow, sitting cross-legged on a worn wooden bench, a violin resting under her chin. She played with her eyes closed, bow gliding slow and sure across the strings. The melody was aching and beautiful and not meant for anyone else. He didn't move until she stopped. "I didn't know you played," he said quietly. She lowered the violin without surprise. "You weren't supposed to find me here. I wasn't looking for you." "Not exactly." Willow stood, brushing bark dust from her jeans. "It's my uncle's land. He keeps the trail clear and lets me come when I need to think. I'll go if you want me to." She looked at him for a long moment. "No. You're here now." Wesley stepped forward slowly. "I didn't mean to push. With the theater. I wanted to do something that mattered. You have no idea what that place is to me." "Then tell me." Willow hesitated, then looked down. "My mom used to take me every Saturday, even when we couldn't afford new coats or groceries. She said stories kept us alive when nothing else could. After she died, it was the only place that still felt like her." He breathed out once, quietly. "I'm sorry." She nodded but didn't look up. "It's not about the money. It's never been about that. I don't want to be someone's project, Wesley. I don't want to be fixed. I don't think you're broken." Willow looked up now, her eyes sharp. "Then stop trying to rescue me." "I'm not. I'm trying to show you that what you care about matters to me too." She crossed her arms, hugging herself against the cold. "I don't know what this is." "I don't either," he said honestly. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day I stepped on that ice." She glanced away, jaw tight. "You don't belong here." "I didn't think so either. But then I met you." Willow's breath caught just slightly. He stepped forward again. Slowly, carefully. "I'm not asking you to change your life for me. I'm not trying to change mine for you. But this, whatever it is, it could be real." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the flicker of something dangerous. "Hope." Then she said, "You always get what you want?" "Not always. And if I walk away, I'll still restore the theater. But I'll regret not finding the courage to ask you to stay." The wind stirred the trees above them, scattering brittle leaves across the trail. Willow looked down at the violin in her hands, then back up at him. "I've never met anyone like you," she said softly. "Same. I don't know how this ends. Maybe we don't need to know yet." She let out a long, shaky breath. Then finally she stepped forward and placed the violin carefully in its case. When she straightened, her hand slipped into his without hesitation. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Wesley felt steady. Not because the ground was solid, but because she was choosing to stand beside him. Willow's fingers laced with Wesley's as they walked the rest of the trail in silence. No declarations, no promises. Just the sound of pine needles crunching beneath their boots and the rhythm of two people learning how to move together. By the time they reached the edge of town, snow had started to fall, soft, slow flakes that dusted rooftops and gathered on coach shoulders. Wesley glanced at her once, then again, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to look too long. But she didn't pull away. That night, he didn't return to his cabin. They sat on her porch, wrapped in 2 old blankets and a quiet that didn't need to be filled. She made tea in chipped mugs, and he told her about the first time he ever made money, barely 15, selling refurbished laptops to his neighbors. At one point, she laughed so hard at a story about a botched investor call that she spilled tea on her jeans. "You're not who I thought you'd be," she said, dabbing at her thigh with a napkin. "I get that a lot." "No, I thought you'd be temporary. Like a snowstorm or a flat tire. Annoying, loud, and gone by morning." He leaned back, letting the steam from his cup curl toward the sky. "And now?" She didn't answer. But she didn't look away either. The next morning, the old marquee of the Majestic Theater lit up for the first time in over a decade. The letters spelled out a single line: opening night, 1 week. Willow stood in front of it with her arms crossed, the collar of her coat pulled tight. Wesley joined her a minute later, holding 2 coffees from the cafe across the street. "You picked a movie yet?" she asked without looking at him. "I thought you might want to choose." Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders dropped slightly. "Then it has to be Roman Holiday." He raised an eyebrow. "Black and white. Do you trust me or not?" "I trust you." She turned then, slow and deliberate. "Even if it's not what you would have picked?" "Especially then." Later that afternoon, he stood in the balcony of the theater, watching workers install the last of the velvet seats. The walls had been painted a deep navy, the chandeliers polished until they gleamed like gold. He didn't touch his phone once. Willow arrived just as the final fixture was being tested. She walked the aisles slowly, fingertips grazing the armrests, her expression unreadable. Wesley waited until she reached the stage before speaking. "I know it's not exactly how it used to be." She turned, eyes sweeping over the space. "No, it's better." He felt something loosen in his chest, then something he hadn't realized was wound tight. "Why are you really staying, Wesley?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "You could have left after the first week. After the first fall." He took the steps down to the stage slowly, stopping when they were face to face. "I built a life with walls so high no one could see over them. I thought if I stayed in motion, I'd never have to feel anything too deeply. But then you caught me inches from the ice and looked at me like I was already standing." She blinked once but didn't move. "You didn't care what I owned, what I'd built, or what I could buy. You saw me scared, clumsy, lost. And you didn't flinch." His voice softened. "You made me want to stay still. And that's never happened before." Willow's hand found his, not tentative, certain. The night of the reopening arrived with a sky full of stars and a line down the street. Wesley wore a charcoal suit, no tie, and held the door as the townspeople filed into the restored theater. Willow wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back at the nape of her neck, and didn't let go of his hand once. As the film began to roll, they stood in the back, watching the flickering screen paint the faces of the crowd in soft light. Children whispered. Couples leaned together. A group of teenagers tried to hold in laughter during the first scene. Willow turned to him halfway through. "This is what my mother would have wanted," she said, voice barely audible over the projector hum. Wesley nodded. Then it was worth everything. After the credits rolled, he took her hand and led her back onto the stage, now empty of props and echoing with the soft shuffle of exiting feet. He didn't kneel. He didn't pull out a ring. Instead, he looked at her like the whole world had narrowed to just them. "I've had more than I ever deserved. But I never had this. Not until you." Willow stepped closer. "What's this?" "Home. Not a place. A person." She didn't answer with words. She stepped into his arms, pressed her forehead to his, and closed the distance between them with a kiss that wasn't loud or rushed, it was steady. Like everything they weren't saying finally found its voice. The crowd was gone. The lights dimmed. And in the quiet, the man who once built empires with a single signature now stood perfectly still, wrapped in the arms of the only person who had ever made him want to stop running. A week later, the theater held its second screening. This time, Wesley didn't just sit in the audience. He stood in front of the curtain, holding Willow's hand in both of his, and said, "I never believed in forever. But I believe in you. So I'm asking, stay. Not just here. With me." She didn't hesitate. "I already am." The applause that followed wasn't for the film. It was for two people who'd found something worth falling for, even on the slipperiest of ground. And for the first time in his life, Wesley didn't care who saw. The snow had melted into slush along the sidewalks, and the edges of spring whispered through the pine trees like a promise. The majestic theater had settled into its second month of operation, and Silver Pine had never felt more alive. Wesley stood inside the lobby, adjusting the collar of his coat as the town's historical society prepared for their monthly screening. He'd been asked to say a few words before the film. Apparently, once you restored a landmark, people assumed you had things to say about local history. He didn't mind. Not now, not when Willow was standing beside him, flipping through the event pamphlet with a soft concentration that made everything else fade. "You know," she said, tapping the edge of the paper, "they're planning to rename the community art grant after my mother." He looked up from adjusting his cuff. She'd like that. She'd laugh at the idea of her name being on anything official. But yeah, she would. He reached for her hand, not for reassurance, just because it grounded him. "What else is on the agenda?" She handed him the pamphlet. "You're introducing the film. Then there's going to be a student performance from the high school choir. After that, cake. Cake. Carrot. From the bakery. I'm more of a chocolate person." She raised her eyebrows. "You're full of surprises." "I've been told." Willow smiled, but it faded quickly. "Wes, have you thought about what's next?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "You mean after the theater? After this town?" She nodded, gaze steady. "After us." He looked around the lobby. The lights were warm, the carpet new, the scent of buttered popcorn lingering in the air. But it wasn't the building he was picturing, it was her, standing barefoot in the kitchen at night, humming while she boiled water for tea or laughing at something he'd said without meaning to be funny. "I have," he said, "more than I've ever let myself think about anything before. And? I don't want to build anything else unless it's with you." She didn't blink. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." Willow let out a slow breath. "It's not just about staying here, is it?" "No. It's about choosing this life. Choosing you. Every day." She studied him for a long moment. "I've been thinking too," she said. "I've spent so much time making sure I could stand on my own, I didn't consider what it would mean to stand beside someone." He took a step closer. "And now I don't want to do it alone anymore." The curtain in the theater rustled as the audience settled and the event coordinator peeked her head out, mouthing something about 5 minutes. Willow leaned in. "You're about to become Silver Pine's favorite honorary local." "I already am," he whispered. She rolled her eyes, but she squeezed his hand before slipping into the crowd. The lights dimmed, the projector whirred to life, and Wesley spoke to the crowd about memory, about legacy, about how sometimes the most important places are the ones we almost forget. But as he looked out at the faces, he saw only one that held him steady. After the event, they walked home together. The night was cold, but not sharp. The stars were out and the moon lit the road in a way that made the snowbanks glow faintly blue. "I've been working on something," Wesley said suddenly. Willow turned her head. "Another renovation?" "Sort of. I bought the lot behind the theater." Her eyebrows rose. "Why?" "I want to build something new. Something for the town. A music and arts center. With practice rooms. A recording studio. A gallery space." She stopped walking. "You're serious?" "I already have the permits. I talked to the mayor. It's happening." Willow stared at him, eyes wide, then quieted. "You did all that?" "For you. For this town. For what you've shown me matters." She stepped forward, placed her hands on either side of his face, and kissed him so gently it made his pulse stutter. When she pulled back, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I love you." It was the first time she'd said it. He didn't hesitate. "I love you. I'm not going anywhere." They stood there in the middle of the road, beneath stars that felt close enough to touch. And for once, there was no rush to fill the silence. Months passed. The Arts Center broke ground in early summer, with Willow helping to design the community music wing herself. Children ran through the construction site on weekends, laughing and daring each other to jump off the low foundation walls. Wesley watched them from a folding chair, coffee in hand, his other arm wrapped around Willow's waist. The town had taken to calling him Mr. Ellis, half-jokingly. They didn't correct anyone. Later that fall, they held their wedding at the Majestic. No tuxedos. No ballroom. Just soft lights, a string quartet, and the scent of pine needles in the air. Willow wore a tea-length dress with a silk ribbon around her waist, and Wesley wore the same charcoal suit from opening night. As she walked down the aisle, he wasn't thinking about the companies he'd built or the cities he'd conquered. He was thinking about a frozen lake and a woman who'd looked at him like he was worth saving. When they exchanged vows, she said, "You didn't just teach me to trust again. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen and loved exactly as I am." He said, "You gave me the courage to stop running. And that's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me." The town clapped until their hands hurt. The cake was carrot, and he ate every bite. That night, they danced on the stage where they'd kissed for the first time. Just the two of them. No music. No audience. Just slow steps and a love that had never needed a spotlight to bloom. A year later, Willow stood in the new Arts Center's music room, teaching a group of children to hold violins for the first time. Wesley leaned in the doorway, watching her with a kind of reverence he'd never known he was capable of. When the class ended, she walked to him, flushed and glowing. He slid an arm around her waist. "I didn't think life could feel like this," he said. She rested her head against his chest. "Like what?" "Full." Outside, the mountains stood tall and blue against the sky. The town bustled with early autumn errands. And inside a room built on second chances, a man who once had everything finally realized what it meant to have it all. And he never let it go.